Wyoming Territory, 1882. The wind howled across the high plains like it was trying to scrape the bones off the earth. And Beatrice Allen stood alone on the train platform in Casper with nothing but a carpet bag, a letter that no longer meant anything, and a hollow feeling in her chest. The man who had ordered her through a mail-order bride agency from back east had taken one look at her and said, "You're too thin. I need a woman who looks like she can work." Then he turned and walked off, leaving her standing there like she was nothing more than a mistake. Beatrice had not cried. Not when the train pulled away behind her, not when the few cattlemen on the platform looked away awkwardly, and not when the station master offered her a weak smile and said she could sit inside if she wanted to wait out the wind. She had stood there quietly, jaw tight, shoulders stiff, feeling the bite of the wind through her threadbare coat. She had not eaten since the day before. There had not been enough money for more than a biscuit and a cup of weak coffee in Cheyenne. "You waiting on someone?" a voice asked behind her. She turned. The man wore a wide-brimmed hat low over his eyes, coat dusted with trail dirt, boots worn but strong. His face was sun-dark, jaw rough with stubble, and there were lines at the corners of his eyes that looked like they had been carved there by years of staring across distance. "I was," she said softly. He looked at her for a long moment. "Let me guess, mail-order bride," her chin lifted. "That a problem?" He shook his head. "No, ma'am, just seen it before. Some men do not know what to do with a real woman." She blinked, caught off guard. "He said I was too thin." The man looked her over her narrow shoulders, the way her dress hung loose on her frame, the pinched look of someone who had not had a full meal in too long, and nodded slowly. "Sounds like a fool." She gave a quiet breath of something like laughter. "Well, that fool sent me away and now I am stranded." He stepped forward. "Name's Declan Zane. I have a small ranch around 10 miles west, just me and a few horses now. If you need somewhere to rest, I have a warm fire and food." She narrowed her eyes. "Why would you offer that?" "Because you look like you need it," he said simply. "And I do not turn away people just because someone else already did." She hesitated. "I will not touch you," he added, "not unless you ask." "You have my word." The wind picked up again and her stomach twisted with hunger. "All right," she said, "but just for a few days." He nodded. "We will get you fed first, then you can decide anything else." The ride to his place was silent except for the wind and the creak of the wagon. He gave her his coat before they left town, and though it smelled of horse and leather and something warm underneath, she wrapped it tight around herself without a word. His ranch was small, a cabin with a sloped roof, a corral, a shed. The horses lifted their heads as they pulled in, and Beatrice saw the care he had taken with the place. It was not fancy, but it was solid, lived in. Inside, the cabin smelled like coffee and wood smoke. He stoked the fire before lighting a lantern and moving to the stove. "You sit," he said, nodding toward the table. She lowered herself onto the bench, watching him with cautious eyes. He pulled a tin from the shelf and dropped biscuits into a pan, set a pot of beans to warm, and cracked 2 eggs into a skillet without asking if she liked them that way. She stared at the food like it was gold. When he set the plate in front of her, she picked up the biscuits with shaking hands. "Eat slow," he said gently. "You rush it, you will get sick." She nodded and took small bites, but her eyes stayed wide with hunger. He sat across from her, sipping coffee, not saying anything. She finished both eggs, half the beans, and one more biscuit before leaning back, hands folded in her lap. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You are welcome." Her eyes dropped. "I am not usually like this." "Desperate? You are not desperate. You are surviving." She looked up at him then, really looked. His face was rough but kind. His hands were calloused, nails clean. There was a steadiness in him she had not seen in a long time. "You live alone?" she asked. He nodded. "Had a brother." "Lost him 5 years back. Parents are gone, never married." "Why not?" He shrugged. "Never met anyone who felt right." Their eyes held for a moment. "I do not take charity," she said, voice low. "This is not charity," he said. "You need food, I have food. You need shelter, I have shelter." "You are not taking anything I do not want to give." She stared at the fire. "He said I was too thin." Her voice cracked, like I was broken. Declan's chair scraped the floor as he stood. He crossed the room and knelt beside her, gently taking her hand. "You are not broken," he said. You just need someone who will help you eat." Her throat tightened and she felt something in her chest crack open. "I will stay for a few days," she whispered. "You stay as long as you want," he said. That night she slept in his bed while he made a pallet by the fire. She lay under quilts that smelled like cedar, her body finally full. Her mind quiet for the first time in weeks. In the morning, she woke to the smell of coffee and bacon, and Declan humming low under his breath. He looked over as she stepped into the room. "Hope you are hungry again," she gave a small smile. "I think I am," he grinned back. "Then let us get to work." And just like that, something new began. The third morning brought snow, not heavy, just a thin veil feathering the grass and fencing, softening the sound of the world. Beatrice stood at the edge of the porch, shawl drawn close, watching the flakes drift and melt on the warm wood beneath her feet. Declan came around from the shed with a crate balanced in one arm, his other hand gloved and steady on the gate latch. He wore a wool shirt that had seen better days, and his collar was turned up against the cold, but his step was sure. She hadn't seen him trip over a thing yet. "I was going to start washing windows," she said without turning, "but I suppose that'll wait." Declan set the crate down on the porch. "Windows will still be here when the sun comes back. These lanterns, though, need cleaning, wicks low in two of them." She crouched beside the crate, lifting one of the glass chimneys and holding it to the light. "I used to polish these back home. My father lit one every night, even if he wasn't reading." "Was he a quiet man?" "No," she said, setting the chimney down gently. "He liked the sound of his own voice, especially after rye, but he lit that lamp like it was ritual." Declan pulled off one glove. "You miss him?" She hesitated. "No. But I miss what I thought he might have been before I knew better." He didn't say anything, just handed her a cloth and sat on the top step, rolling up his sleeves. They worked in companionable silence, wiping soot and glass, the wind whispering now and then through the cottonwoods behind the cabin. When her fingers began to cramp, she paused. "Did you ever think of leaving Wyoming?" "Once," he said. "Right after the war, took a wagon out toward Colorado, didn't make it past Rawlins." "What stopped you?" He studied the horizon, where the snow had begun to stick in the hollows. "I realized I didn't want to be anywhere I couldn't smell horses." She smiled faintly. "So you stayed for the smell?" He gave a short laugh. "That and the quiet. Some men need noise to feel alive. I need space." She wiped the last lamp and set it aside. "I used to think I'd end up in a boarding house, teaching girls how to write their letters and not spill ink." "Why didn't you?" "I couldn't afford the uniforms they required. Even teaching, they wanted you dressed like you belonged to someone." Declan stood and picked up the cleaned lanterns one by one, placing them on the shelf beside the door. "You don't need anyone to belong to." She looked down at her hands. "That's kind of you to say. It's not kindness. Just truth." That afternoon, she took a small hatchet from the shed and began splitting kindling by the chopping block. Declan didn't stop her, only watched a moment from the corral before returning to mending a broken gatepost. She liked that, being allowed to try without interference. Later, when the light faded and the wind quieted, they sat by the fire inside. Beatrice mended a torn sleeve from one of Declan's shirts. He was carving something small from a scrap of pine, his hands sure and deliberate. "What are you making?" she asked. He turned it in his fingers. "Horse." "For the shelf, not much to look at now." She tilted her head. "It's taking shape." He met her eyes across the firelight. "So are you." She lowered her gaze, heat rising in her chest. "Careful, Declan." That almost sounded like a compliment. It was. She folded the shirt across her lap. "I'm not used to compliments that don't come with expectations." "Well," he said, setting the carving aside, "I'm not used to company that doesn't make noise just to fill the air." They fell into silence again, but it wasn't hollow. It held something like the space between two trees that knew how to grow without crowding each other. Before she went to bed, she paused by his chair. "I'll make breakfast tomorrow. You've done more than your share." "I won't stop you," he said. "But I'll be up before you." "We'll see," she murmured. And for the first time in a long while, she smiled without effort. By the 6th day, the snow had melted into cold mud, and the wind had lost its bite. Beatrice woke before the rooster, slipping from the bed with quiet steps and pulling on her boots without lighting the lamp. She didn't want to wake Declan, not because she feared him, but because she liked the idea of moving through the stillness first, charting the day before the world noticed. She carried water from the pump, set the coffee pot over the fire, and kneaded the dough she'd left to rise overnight, her sleeves rolled and her hair braided down her back. The rhythm of it quieted her mind in a way she hadn't felt in years. Declan stepped inside just as she was pulling the skillet from the hook. His boots were damp, his hat in hand, and he'd clearly been out in the pasture. "You've been up since before the light," he said. She didn't glance up. "I wanted to see if I could make your biscuits come out better than yesterday's." His eyes flicked to the pan. "You won't hear me complain." They sat across from one another, eating in silence. She'd added salt this time, and the crust turned golden at the edges. He nodded after his first bite, and she didn't need him to say anything more. After breakfast, Declan stood from the table and reached for his coat. "I've got a horse out back favoring his right leg. I'll be out in the barn till midday." Beatrice folded the towel in her lap. "Can I come?" He paused, hand on the doorframe. "You ever pulled a stone from a hoof?" "No, but I've stitched a split palm and boiled bandages over a campfire with a tin cup." He gave a slow nod. "All right, then." The barn was warmer than she expected, the scent of hay and damp leather thick in the air. The sorrel gelding stood quietly in the stall, sides rising slow, eyes gentle. Declan moved with the quiet confidence of someone who'd done this 100 times, but he didn't push her aside. He let her watch as he lifted the hoof, brushing mud and checking the frog. "You see that?" he said, tilting the hoof toward the light. She crouched, eyes narrowing. "There. That dark spot." He passed her the hoof pick. "Try it slow from the inside edge." She worked carefully, bracing the leg as he showed her, and eased the rock free. It was smaller than she expected, just a chip, sharp on one side, but she held it in her palm like it meant something. "Funny how something so small can halt a creature this size," she said. Declan leaned against the stall gate. "Same's true of people." She met his gaze. "You ever had a stone like that?" He looked down at the straw beneath his boots. "I'd say grief fits the shape." She didn't press. The way his voice shifted told her enough. When the work was done, they walked back through the snow-wet grass. The sun was climbing, burning through the thin clouds, and the scent of thawing earth rose around them. At the porch, Declan stopped. "I've been thinking," he said, eyes on the hills beyond the cabin. "You could take the wagon into town tomorrow, trade for cloth, maybe something for your hands. I've got credit at the mercantile." She tightened her shawl. "Why would you do that?" "Because you've been making this place better without asking for anything." She watched his face. "You don't owe me for that, I know, but I'd like to give it anyhow." She hesitated. "I haven't had a new dress since St. Louis." He looked at her then, not just like a man noticing a woman, but like someone seeing where she'd come from without needing her to say it. "Pick whatever fabric you like. Doesn't have to be sensible." She smiled, slow and a little surprised at herself. "Then I might choose green." He tipped his hat back. "I think you'd wear green well." That night she sat by the fire mending the hem of her shawl. He carved a second horse smaller than the first and didn't speak until the fire settled low. "You planning on staying long?" She didn't look up. "I hadn't decided." "Well," he said, setting the carving down beside the first, "I'd like it if you did." She threaded her needle, the quiet stretching between them like a held breath. "I'll think on it," she said. And for the first time, it didn't feel like she was waiting for something to go wrong. It felt like waiting to choose. Beatrice stepped off the wagon with careful feet, her hands still warm from holding the reins. The sky over Casper was wide and pale, and the main street was half slush, half dust, churned by horses and wagon wheels. She gathered her skirt, not wanting the hem soaked through, and glanced behind her. Declan tied the team to a post outside the mercantile. "Take your time," he said, adjusting his hat against the glare. "I'll see to the harnesses." The bell above the door jingled as she stepped into the warmth of the store. Shelves crowded with bolts of fabric, jars of nails, sacks of flour, and tins of lye soap lined the walls. A potbelly stove glowed near the counter, and two older women stood by the dry goods, trading quiet observations about the weather. Beatrice kept to the aisle near the back, where the cloth was folded and tied in neat stacks. She brushed her fingers over a roll of calico, then paused at a bolt of moss-green wool. It wasn't fine, but it was sturdy, with a softness to the weave that surprised her. "You've got an eye for it," said a man's voice. She turned. The storekeeper, a man with gray in his beard and spectacles pushed up on his forehead, nodded toward the fabric. "That one's new in from the east, good for spring sewing, doesn't pull at the seams." She gave a small nod. "I'll take 4 yards." He jotted it down on a slip of paper. "Anything else?" She hesitated, then gestured toward the thread rack. 2 spools, that dark green." When she stepped outside again, Declan was waiting at the wagon with a coil of rope in one hand. He looked up, then down at the wrapped parcel in her arms. "Find what you wanted, it'll do," she said. "I'll have to piece the bodice, but I think there's enough." He helped her into the seat, then climbed up beside her. As the wagon rolled forward, she tilted her head. "Do you come to town often?" "Only when I have to, supplies, horseshoeing." "Letters," she tucked the fabric beside her. "It's strange being among people again, even strangers. I used to think crowds meant safety." He gave a low sound, not quite a laugh. "They can be louder than loneliness." They left the town behind, the road turning rougher as it cut toward the hills. The snowmelt had left puddles in the ruts, and the horses moved with steady care. When they crested a low ridge, Beatrice reached toward the back of the wagon bed and retrieved a small tin wrapped in cloth. "I bought something else," she said. "It's not useful." He glanced over. "Let's see it." She unwrapped the cloth to reveal a tin of lemon drops, their sugar coating soft from the journey. "These were my brother's favorite," she said. "When we were children, I don't even know why I picked them up." "Habit, maybe." He reached for one, rolling it between his fingers before popping it into his mouth. "Bet he had good taste." She didn't answer right away. The road dipped and the wheels bumped over a patch of frozen mud. "He drowned," she said finally, "in the Missouri." "I was 17. Declan's hands tightened slightly on the reins. "I'm sorry. He was the only one who ever tried to protect me, even when he didn't know how." She tucked the tin back into the cloth. "I think I bought these to remember that part." He didn't offer comfort. He just let the space be quiet. When they arrived at the ranch, the sun was beginning to dip low behind the pines. Beatrice carried the parcel of fabric inside and laid it on the table, her fingers lingering on the knot. "I'd like to sew it into a dress that fits me now," she said. Declan leaned against the doorframe. "Not the girl who got off the train." "No," she said, "someone who eats breakfast and chops kindling." He stepped forward, his voice quiet. "If you stitched that dress, what would you wear it for?" She looked up at him. "I'd wear it for the man who gave me a place when I had none." His gaze held hers. "And if he asked you to stay, not as a guest, not as a debt, just with him," her voice was steady. "Then I'd say yes." Declan reached across the table and took her hand rough to rough, the warmth of each other grounding them both. She didn't flinch, didn't draw away. They stood like that a long while as the light slipped lower past the window and the lantern's glow gently rose to meet it. The green dress took her 5 evenings to finish. Beatrice stitched it in the hush between supper and sleep, the lamplight catching the thread as it pulled through the wool. She worked at the kitchen table while Declan carved or read from the old journal he kept tucked behind the flower bin, a ledger once, now filled with notes on horses, weather, and little else. He never interrupted her sewing, but sometimes she caught him watching her hands. On the 6th evening, she put the dress on. It fit. Not perfectly, her shoulders had broadened with the woodcutting, and the seams tugged a little at her arms, but it belonged to her now. She stepped out of the bedroom, feet bare, hair loose, and stood where the firelight touched the hem. Declan looked up from his chair. "I didn't think I'd see it finished so fast," he said. "I didn't think I'd still be here," she answered. He stood and crossed the room slowly, his boots scuffing the pine floor. When he reached her, he didn't reach for her waist or hands. Instead, he touched the sleeve, his thumb brushing the seam at her shoulder. "I never wanted to marry out of loneliness," she said. "That's why I kept moving. I was scared that's all I had left." His voice was quiet, and now she met his eyes. "Now I know the difference between being alone and being seen." Declan's hand dropped to his side. "I don't have much to offer. I don't own more than this land and a few horses. I can't promise ease." "I don't want ease," she said. "I want a place where I'm not waiting to be turned away." He reached for her then, not rushed, not hesitant, just sure. His hand slid into hers, rough palm against rough fingers, and she stepped forward, resting her forehead against his chest. The fire popped behind them, warming the corners of the room. "Then stay," he said. "We'll build something with both our hands." They were married 2 weeks later at the edge of the pasture where the cottonwoods began to bud. The preacher came from Douglas, and the neighbors' 2 ranch families and the widow from the ridge stood in a loose circle while Beatrice wore her green dress and Declan combed his hair for the first time she'd seen. The wind that day was low, the sun steady, and it felt like the land itself had quieted to listen. Spring came on slow but sure. Beatrice planted onions and potatoes in neat rows beside the porch while Declan built a henhouse from old planks he scavenged from the shed. She hemmed a second dress from pale blue muslin, and he installed a second shelf above the stove for her spices and jars. Neither of them said the word love aloud for weeks, but it was in the way he rose early to warm water for her washing, and in the way she left a sweet biscuit wrapped in linen beside his tools each morning. One night, after a long day spent mending a fence that had split from the thaw, they sat on the porch steps, boots off, the last light sinking behind the ridge. She leaned her head against his shoulder. "I had a dream last night," she said. "I was back on that train platform." But this time no one turned away. He wrapped his arm around her waist. "That's because you weren't meant to be left behind." She turned to face him, her eyes soft. "I want to raise children here. I want them to know what it means to build something slowly." He brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. "Then we'll teach them, together." And in the months that followed, they did. The ranch grew not large, but steady. They took in 2 orphaned colts that Declan trained with quiet patience. Beatrice traded her baking in town for bolts of cloth and a new kettle. When the old fence line rotted through, they rebuilt it side by side, her hammer swinging with the same rhythm as his. By winter's return, the cabin had expanded by 1 room. Beatrice lined the shelves with dried herbs and jars of preserves. Declan carved a small cradle from pine, even before she told him she was carrying their first child. They didn't talk about the past anymore, not because it hurt, but because the future had become louder. At night they lay beneath the quilt she sewed from scraps of her old clothes and his worn shirts, and they whispered about names, about weather, about what trees they'd plant come spring, and when the snow came again, it came gentle. Inside, the fire burned steady. And 2 people, once strangers, slept warm in a home they'd built with nothing more than kindness, time, and the quiet, steady love of 2 hearts that had waited long enough.